Recording on. Today is Wednesday, February 3rd, 3:30 section. What we're going to do today is continue on with lecture note 2, finishing up EIC, and then talking through homework 2, which will be your next assignment. So where we left off on the last class is we talked about the E and the EIC. And we basically said there were two things that we had to analyze relative to the economic impact. I gave you at least two screens in Bloomberg. One was ECFC, the other ECSU. But in addition, we might want to look at other data. So for example, today, the Democrats in Congress are moving towards a $15 minimum wage. That would have economic impacts. So we'd have to think about that. We'd have to think about what's happening with prices of oil. Oil prices go up, then that might affect certain companies because the economy is getting better, more energy is being used. And so that would be an economic impact we'll talk about a little bit later. So economic analysis, first step. Step 2, we're using beta as a proxy for economic sensitivity. It's not perfect, but just a way to talk about a correlation. And so again, higher beta, above 1, more sensitive to changes in the economy, less than 1, less sensitive. So those are the two parts of the economic analysis at a minimum we're going to start with. Right. Once we've done our E, we then move to our I, which is the industry. And again, this semester, we have defined an attractive industry as a positive spread industry. An unattractive industry is a negative spread industry. So we are using industry spread to define industry attractiveness. And we've already talked about how about half the performance of that spread is going to be based on the industry that you're in and the factors associated with that industry. By the way, the other definition that's relevant is how we're going to look at competitive advantage. And so competitive advantage in this class is performance against peers. So specifically, if we are defining spread as defining industry attractiveness, then relative spread determines whether or not you have competitive advantage. So in a strategy class, everybody's good at something. That's not this class. In this class, you have to do better than your peer group. So you could be doing well, but you're doing well because you're in a good industry, not because you're a great company. The better companies outperform their peers, regardless of situation. So our definition, more narrow, is positive spread relative to industry spread, company versus industry. That demonstrates competitive advantage. That's how we're going to do C. Right? So let's put this in the context of some data. So again, open up Bloomberg. All right, so here's Bloomberg. So let's say that I mentioned oil and gas. Let's go look at ExxonMobil. So if I look at Exxon, go to RV. One of the screenshots we would take for our assignment is markets and beta. So in this case, I'm going to look at the global oil peers as opposed to the North American peers. So given this screenshot, what can we say about the E sensitivity of the oil industry and about ExxonMobil in particular? So how would we answer the E question with this data?
You can say that because the beta is greater than 1, it's more sensitive to the market fluctuation.
What beta is greater than 1?
The industries and also ExxonMobil specifically.
Okay. So really important in this class, even though I think I know what you're talking about, to get credit for any answer, you have to use the numbers themselves. So just use the numbers. to say what you're saying? What
So,
number are you referring to?
are we looking at adjusted or the raw beta?
In this, we said we're going to arbitrarily choose raw, just to be consistent. So again, when you're doing your papers or your presentations for grades, even if you say what you said is correct, I will give you no credit unless you use the numbers. So what would the numbers and correct answer be for this industry?
For the industry, they have a raw beta of 1.29. ExxonMobil specifically is a raw beta of 1.13. So it does move with the economy. It is sensitive to the changes in the economy.
All right, thank you for using the numbers, but I think it's not just moving with the economy. If you're at 1.29, you're moving faster than the economy, because that's the whole point. If a 1.29 raw beta means that if the market goes up 1%, oil companies go up 1.29. If the market goes down 1%, oil companies go down 1.29. So they're moving up and down faster than the market. So it's not just that they're sensitive, market sensitive, they are more sensitive is what you need to basically be clear about, right? Now, Exxon is also more sensitive than the average company, but Exxon is less sensitive than the average oil and gas company. They're at a 1.13 versus 1.29, right? Everybody see that? Right. I know you're like, gee, do we really have to use numbers? Yes, you really got to use numbers, right? Two reasons. One, because I said so. You're going to get zeros on your assignments if you don't do it, no matter how many words you write. And number two, it actually adds to your credibility. Using data when you answer questions in the real world makes you sound much more credible than people that just talk in these general comments, right? So let's look at the
Professor,
yes.
I'm sorry for interrupting you. How are you able to add more companies to compare with?
I defaulted to this one, which was North American. I switched this from North American to global.
All right, great, thank you.
So continuing on with the global list, I'm going to go to custom. I'm going to reload our spread template. So tell me about whether or not global oil and gas is attractive or unattractive, and whether Exxon has competitive advantage against this peer group.
Using the market cap weighted average of the general industry, the industry itself has a positive spread with ROIC being 8.36 and the WACC being 6.49, the difference of which is a positive spread. However, Exxon particularly has a negative spread with the ROIC of negative 0.27 and a WACC of 7.70, which reflects a negative spread, making it less attractive to the general industry.
And therefore no competitive advantage being demonstrated against this peer group.
Correct.
Great answer. That's what I'd like to see in the write-up. All right, now let's look at row 116. Ecopetrol. Do they have competitive advantage? What can we say about Ecopetrol? Do they have competitive advantage?
Well, Ecopetrol seems like, oh, well, they have a positive spread. They have a comparative advantage compared to companies who have a negative spread, right? But dude, when you say, what are you looking for when you say, do they have a competitive advantage?
Well, that's a question. So competitive advantage is relative performance against the industry.
Yes, they do. They do have a competitive advantage because their ROIC is higher than the industry or than the market cap weighted average.
It's not ROIC, it's spread. So what's ROIC minus WACC for Etripitol? It's about 1.76. 9.01 minus 7.25. What's 8.36 minus 6.49?
1.87.
So therefore,
They
no,
do not.
they do- that's the way I want you to think about this. Right? So even though they're creating slight value, they have a positive spread. It's just less positive than the rest of the industry. So again, the interpretation would be they're in an industry that's attractive, but they're not outperforming their industry. Therefore, they do not demonstrate competitive advantage. Now, this industry is not normal because pretty much everybody in this industry has a negative spread. You can actually scroll down this list, with the exception of Saudi Aramco. Right? And their market cap is 1.8 trillion. So when you look at the weighted average, it's really Saudi Arabia is making all the money and nobody else is. So this industry is a little distorted, right? But technically, given our definition, Saudi Aramco has competitive advantage, 6.75, 16.75 minus 5.88, clear competitive advantage. And they are the industry because they're so big, right? But they're kind of unique because if you take them out of this list, it's an awful industry, right? So as a matter of fact, let's look at North America. If I just looked at North American oil companies, is this an attractive industry? No, it is not, because the industry has a negative spread, negative 2.91 ROIC against an 8.67 WACC. Second question, does Exxon demonstrate competitive advantage?
Yeah, because their spread is better than the rest of the competitors.
Exactly. So you can actually destroy value, but still have some competitive advantage because look, Exxon's the better oil company. They're doing less bad than their peers because they're good at what they do. Okay. So with the exception that when you throw them in there with Saudi Aramco, no one's doing well because the state owned, basically oil company of Saudi Arabia is dominant. But outside of that, basically, when you look at the more commercial firms, Exxon's actually pretty good, but they're just in a tough industry. And so that's the way we would say this. Just industry destroying value, especially this segment. And Exxon, though, destroying less value, therefore they're demonstrating some advantage. Does everybody understand how we interpret this? Let's look at McDonald's. Fast casual industry. Is this an attractive industry? And does McDonald's demonstrate competitive advantage?
Yes, McDonald's does show a competitive advantage because their ROIC of 14.02% and their WACC of 7.09 is a larger spread than the industry.
Which is the 13.55 minus the
13.55 for the ROIC and the 8.28% for the WACC.
All right, so the industry, the 13.55 minus 8.28, that's about 5 points rounding off of spread, attractive industry. McDonald's, which shows almost 7 points of spread, is more attractive and therefore demonstrates some form of competitive advantage. That's how you should be interpreting this data. Questions about any of that?
I have a more general question about this. So in Bloomberg, is there a way to make one of the columns reflect the spread metric itself? So you don't need to always subtract?
Yeah, so when you get through your certification, if you go here, there's something called a formula where you can actually create what's called a custom formula. And in the custom formula, you can actually create, I don't think I have one called spread already saved. But basically I create a formula that says ROIC minus WACC. Okay. And the way you create it is you put here in the field which one you want, ROIC, latest filing, hit enter. And then what Bloomberg will do is it'll put it in this box as an equation. And so this is the database field, and then you put it in minus, and then same thing, the WAC, and then enter. And so this is my custom field within the Bloomberg database. And you can see these are the database numbers, and then these are the friendly terms. I could then save it or save and use it. So I'll save this as spread. And makes my life easier. So I now have in my Bloomberg terminal a custom field called spread, which I could quickly add to my template. And so that therefore I don't have to visualize the math. I could actually just be lazy and let it do the math for me. Makes it a little bit easier to do the analysis. Great question. Other questions?
I had a quick question. I had a clarification question in particular. If we move our attention to like 104, which is Yum brands, they have a 37.47 spread. Is competitive advantage, like I understand competitive advantage is always compared to the industry, but if you look in between McDonald's and Yum, do you have to talk about that kind of comparison as well? Like technically speaking, Yum has a stronger competitive advantage than McDonald's, even if they beat the industry average.
So great question. So I think there's two premises to your question. Let's address each one. So the first premise is, can more than one company have competitive advantage? The answer is yes. So as you're already starting to notice, McDonald's demonstrates competitive advantage, Yum demonstrates competitive advantage, Domino's with a 59-point spread demonstrate competitive advantage, Jack in the Box competitive advantage, Papa John's, etc. But here's the point: more than one company can have competitive advantage. Now, on a relative basis, obviously Yum is doing something even better than McDonald's, so we could talk about that separately. So that's the second part of your equation, but they both still can have competitive advantage. Okay, make sense?
Sounds good. Thank you.
Sure. Other questions about this in the data? All right. So let's go back to our PowerPoint. Screen. So I'm just going to share my desktop. Easy to jump back and forth. So when we do the industry analysis, we define, as I said, an attractive industry based on spread. The next question is why? Why is it an attractive industry? So to answer that question, we're going to use the Porter 5 forces analysis, which you're probably familiar with from previous classes. So given Michael's Porter framework for 5 forces, those 5 forces should explain the industry structure and therefore should explain why an industry has a positive or negative spread. So the 5 forces listed here. First one is buyer power. Very simply, who has the power in the relationship? The companies on the list behind me in the retail industry or fast casual industry, or their customers. If their customers have the power, they're not going to make as much money. If they have the power, then they're going to make a lot more money. One of the things that drives buyer power is switching costs. You guys are too young to remember this, but a few years ago, you actually couldn't switch cell phone carriers and take your number with you. So if you were on Verizon and you wanted to go to T-Mobile, you actually had to get a brand new phone number if you wanted to switch to T-Mobile. So as a result, switching costs were high, less people switched, and the carriers basically kept prices much higher because they knew that you really weren't going to leave. Government changed that. They switched the regulations, now called number portability. And now if I want to go from Verizon to T-Mobile, it takes about 3 minutes. And I can keep my phone number and switch carriers and then switch again if I want. That has given power to the buyers and has made the industry more attractive, or sorry, more attractive from a buyer standpoint, less profitable over time. So again, thinking about the buyer power, thinking about what changes buyer power is one of the factors that explains the spread. The opposite is our suppliers. Who has the relationship here? Is it the people that are supplying us, or do we have power over our suppliers? In Bloomberg, you can look at suppliers by typing SPLC and get a sense of the supply chain of the company. Now, this is a very important caveat because people have been confused with this in previous classes. But the idea is when you do an industry, 5 forces, you're doing all of the companies on that list. You're not doing just McDonald's, right? So 5 forces analysis is not technically on McDonald's, it's on the fast casual or restaurant business. Now, over on the left, these are McDonald's suppliers, but you get a sense of the types of suppliers that fast casual has, and you see it's primarily the food product companies and the agribusinesses. And those businesses don't seem to have a lot of power over fast casual, at least not historically. Now, the third element we'd want to look at is barriers to entry and exit as a third force. So again, question is, are there entry and exit barriers? Because if there are, then it's harder to make or easier to make money or harder to make money depending on which way the barrier is going. If there's a lot of barriers to entry, then it's good for the industry. They make more money. If there's not a lot of barriers to entry, it's easy to get in and out, then that actually tends to promote competition and industries tend to be less profitable. Although remember, it works in both directions. If it's easy to exit an industry, that's different than if somebody can't leave an industry. So you might actually end up with like a wounded competitor who can't leave the industry and he takes everybody down with them. So again, we got to think about barriers to entry and exit and whether that affects that industry. Substitutes. Are there viable substitute products and how viable are they? Let's say I'm looking at travel and I want to go from DC to New York. Well, I could fly. Substitute to flying would be train. Substitute to train would be driving or bus. There's a lot of different ways to go to New York, okay? And the prices of those substitutes, the convenience of those substitutes might change how I go. If I'm going from DC to San Francisco, well, it's a different story. Then some of those substitutes become less viable and plane is much more viable than car or train, right? If I'm going from DC to Tokyo, well, now I'm going to fly, right? There is no train, there is no car that gets me there. So the availability of substitutes changes, but nonetheless, how available and what they cost and how viable they are affects the industry. Rivalry, that's the final force. How intense is the rivalry amongst the players? The biggest determinant of rivalry in the short term is the supply-demand balance. If there's a huge amount of demand and not much supply, it's easy to make money. You can basically just take orders. If there's a huge amount of demand, supply and no demand, it's hard to make money. It tends to get cutthroat competition. So understanding the supply-demand balance is key to understanding rivalry. The other key to rivalry is how many players are there in an industry. If you're a monopoly or an oligopoly, it's a lot easier to make money than if it's a bunch of players in an industry. So for example, when I work with Stanley Black & Decker, you can actually see that here in Bloomberg, SBD. Actually, it's SWK is your ticker. Look at Stanley Black & Decker, SPLC supply chain. Good example of this. If you look at who they're selling to, Lowe's and Home Depot represent 25% of their business for Stanley Black & Decker total company, right? And so here's the point. If they're selling retail tools, like you're buying a drill or something in the retail market, you're going to buy at Lowe's or Home Depot. there's not really a lot of other places that they're going to be able to sell you a consumer drill. And so it's not just that the 25% of their total business. For certain tools, they're like 80, 90% of the business. And those are the only two places that they're going to sell. So that's the point. The people that have the power in this relationship are not Stanley Black & Decker. It's Lowe's and Home Depot. And they exploit them all the time. That's something Walmart has been notorious for in retail, to use their size against small retailers. So again, we're going to start thinking about relative power as we think about the industry as well. So back to McDonald's. Here is Mickey D's. We said it had a positive spread. So you guys help me understand why. We just went through the 5 forces. What about the 5 forces explains the positive spread that we currently see in the restaurant industry? Why does the restaurant industry have a positive spread? What would you say?
The suppliers probably have low supplier power, so they have no choice but to do business with McDonald's, because a large percentage of their business comes from McDonald's.
All right, I want to put an asterisk on what you said. Remember, when you do an industry analysis, you're not talking about McDonald's, you're talking about the restaurants. When you do a company analysis, competitive advantage, you do McDonald's. So everything you said, just say that with restaurants as opposed to McDonald's in particular.
One thing that comes to mind for me is that in the restaurant industry, there's a lot of hard assets. So there's a much lower cost of debt than in some other industries. And that'll bring down your WACC. And so if you're comparing 2 industries with the same return, and the only difference is the cost of capital, the restaurants might be one reason.
But put that in the context of one of these forces. Which force does that apply to?
Well, I guess the high level of real estate and the hard assets that are necessary to even break into the business it brings down the threat of new entrants.
Yeah.
That's the perspective that I would look at it through.
So let's think about it that way, which is there is a high barrier to entry to creating a national chain with thousands and thousands of restaurants, and at the same time, a brand that you're going to want to go to. And so creating that, I'm not saying it can't be done, it's been done, but it's a high barrier to entry. You're not just seeing, these national brands pop up all the time. And particularly in a pandemic, getting the capital to do that might be even harder. So that's a very important thing, barriers to entry. And this industry has some barriers to entry. What else is favorable? Looking at the other forces, if anything.
I mean, I would also say buyer power is probably low, because it's all about, like for me, I'm not going to drive the extra mile to go to get some other fast food. You just got like Wendy's better than McDonald's. And McDonald's has places everywhere. So
Is that true for everybody else? Are we kind of, going to our core brands over and over again? We shop on convenience more so than anything else?
unless it's Chick-fil-A. I mean,
So, but what other people think? Are you going to the same brands kind of consistently? Or are you like, nah, I'm going to go try something else today all the time?
I mean, I don't know, for those of you that live in College Park, if you don't have a car, you really only have like 6 options. So you kind of just do those over and over. So yeah, I think that would be pretty true.
So there's in a way, for the buyer power, like we have choice, but we don't seem to exercise as much choice as we think we might. And so the buyer power doesn't seem to be hurting this industry right now. What about substitutes?
Yeah, Professor. Substitutes for the restaurant industry are really high, because you can get there's so many different options and so many different restaurant choices. But when you're looking for a certain like a certain meal of some kind, I'd say substitutes become a lot lower. Like if you're looking for a certain, like if you're looking to get like a hamburger, for example, that limits your options for substitute restaurants significantly.
So let's break it out. For substitutes, what are some of the substitutes?
Like cooking at home or going to like a more sit down restaurant or
There's two of them.
Meal prep services.
So the meal in the boxes, restaurants, and cooking at home. I can think of one other big one.
Like frozen dinners, like
Yeah,
pre-packaged.
or just grocery stores, like increasingly delis at grocery stores, or you can say frozen dinners, packaged foods. But so the point is, there's lots of substitutes. But the real question is, are these substitutes hurting the restaurant fast casual business right now? Is that hurting the spread?
Maybe on an almost insignificant level, sure. But
Yeah,
I mean, like meal prep, I mean, has been a failed industry. And other than that, I mean, I wouldn't even put a substitute. I wouldn't even put like a fast food versus a higher end restaurant in the same bucket. I don't think that's even really a substitute.
yeah. So again, it doesn't seem to, these substitutes don't seem to be hurting them that much. Although the one caveat is during the pandemic, some of these restaurants are actually competing with fast casual. How?
Like
Out.
offering delivery and kind of like a faster way to experience their products.
Yeah, I like this list. You got Cheesecake Factory, the home delivery of that through the DoorDash, Uber Eats, Postmates, whatever. That in a way has made these substitutes a little bit more viable. The restaurants, because first of all, you can't go eat there; they're closed because of COVID, and so they are doing delivery. But the point is, it doesn't seem to be really hurting the profitability of this industry all that much, right? What about Rivalry? Rivalry for this industry.
I think Rivalry's pretty tough because I remember like when the Chicken Wars first kind of came out, the marketing was pretty aggressive from all the the big chicken fast food places. So they're definitely competing for market share. It goes for pizza and that kind of thing.
So let's just talk about the chicken wars. So chicken wars are, you got basically the king chicken is probably Chick-fil-A, and then Popeyes had a pretty mean chicken sandwich that they were doing. Now McDonald's and whatchamacallit, Wendy's are going into the chicken market much more aggressively. Shake Shack has had their own chicken sandwich. So, but is this rivalry like really hurting these companies? How do they do rivalry? Is it cutthroat price competition?
Market.
Well, I'm just saying, like, are they doing rivalry because they're saying, I have the 99-cent chicken sandwich and that's what you should come and buy? I mean, every chicken sandwich I just named is pretty expensive.
It doesn't seem to be like a race to the bottom. They just kind of like differentiate. Like for example, Popeyes had like a brioche bun, which is different from Chick-fil-A. They had a special sauce, which again is similar but different to Chick-fil-A. So they kind of have distinct differences that make people want to come to them, not like just merely price.
That's the point. I'm not saying there's not rivalry. There's a rivalry. But the way that they compete is they're not trying to compete on price, not generally, not within these major brands. They're competing on some unique differentiated factor. So obviously the spreads could be higher if they were the only game in town. But the flip side is they're not doing it with ultra cutthroat competition to drive the price. It's not a race to the bottom. So yes, there's some rivalry, but it's not intense. So as we go through the 5 forces, none of these forces right now are that unfavorable. Most of them are actually fairly favorable to the industry. And that's probably why the industry has the spread that it has. That's what I want you to say. Make sense? Now, the next and probably more important question is what happens in the future? And we're going to say 5 years arbitrarily for the future, but what happens to the spread in 5 years? Now, rather than directly forecasting the spread, what you're going to do is you're going to forecast the change in the 5 forces. And the idea is if nothing changes about the industry structure, then the spread's going to be about the same in 5 years as it is today. If these forces get more favorable, then the spread's going to go up. And if the forces get less favorable, spread could go down or turn negative. So it's really the forecast of the future is about forecasting change in spread. Change in the forces. So looking into your crystal balls of the future, would any of this change in 5 years?
I think supplier power would change. I think that increasingly we're going towards like third-party delivery system. And if like those companies like DoorDash and Grubhub continue to buy, influence and mind share, then they'll have a lot more bargaining power over at McDonald's. But then again, they could also just get acquired by a McDonald's. So who knows?
Well, like I said, there's two parts of that. One, that also affects the substitutes, but it's not a leap of logic to say that these home delivery services don't actually start owning the food that they deliver. So long story short, suppliers could be impacted. I think there's another big supplier thing that could really change the dynamic here. And I'll give you a hint. I mentioned it at the beginning of class in the E section.
Could it be foreign policy?
I wasn't thinking about that one, but I will say there is a government policy that they're talking about changing.
The supply of workers is going to cost like twice as much.
Minimum wage. If the Democrats push through a national minimum wage of $15 per user, it's going to pretty much double the labor cost of this entire industry. All right, because no one's paying $15 an hour. Or the average is probably closer to $7, which is the minimum wage in many states. So you're going to see much higher labor costs, which could hurt their industry spread. So that's one thing that could be an interesting dynamic. What other things could potentially change, or will they? So we got maybe some additional supplier rival or supplier substitutes, potentially some disruptive power of minimum wage. Do you think that barriers to entry or exit are going to change in the next 5 years?
I could see like some restaurants, as we've seen, like you mentioned, Cheesecake Factory, like they've been able to pivot into the little like faster paced, kind of more casual scene. So some of the restaurants that we've previously thought to be more like sit down, like the Chili's and Applebee's of the world, maybe getting more into the faster way of eating and like the more similar to McDonald's and Starbucks and things like that.
All right. So synthesize everything we said. What's the spread going to be in 5 years?
I would say probably the same. I mean, if the industry was able to weather like the Corona storm, I can't foresee any major change that would affect it this much. So it seems like all things considered, and let's say that like the minimum wage doesn't go up or it stays relatively similar, the spread would stay pretty similar the next 5 years.
Great. All right. What about the final element would be C, which is competitive advantage. We said, given this data, that McDonald's is demonstrating a competitive advantage by having a higher spread relative to the industry, 6.8 versus 5.11. Why? What does McDonald's do that gives it some hint of competitive advantage? Why are they outperforming their peers?
They're everywhere. So like we said, convenience is a big thing, whatever's right in front of us. So if there's McDonald's always in front of us, then I mean, subsequently we'll probably go to McDonald's more.
All right. So they have the location convenience factor and the brand associated with that. What else makes McDonald's better?
Their size gives them major bargaining power with like meat suppliers and like potato suppliers.
They're the largest fast food chain in the world. So absolutely. What else?
Their promotional offers.
Okay. They're pretty good at promotion.
Along that line, like they have economy of scale. So basically, they probably have better distribution centers, and they probably get cheaper products because they're ordering in such a large quantity.
Yeah. The other aspect I did mention in previous classes, McDonald's also spends, there's a science to where they put a McDonald's, and they probably spend more than anybody else figuring out that research. And so just an example, they tend to be on the right when you're driving into commute for breakfast and lunch, because those are the more profitable meals for fast casual. So they've put the McDonald's strategically on the parts of the road, and particularly near intersections, which are more towards the morning commute. And that is a strategic choice that they have made beyond being in busy intersections. So I'm just saying there's a lot of factors we could mention that give them advantage. So here's the final question. Is anything going to change about this in the next 5 years that keeps the spread same, higher, or lower?
I think you might see the average spread moving more towards brands who have more locations outside of major cities. Like I think there might be a slight shift to the mean. But I don't know, maybe that's just speculation. I'm not sure.
Okay. So are you saying then that that's going to be up or down?
I don't know. I'd have to look at each of these companies and see, what their spread is and where their geography is. So I'm not sure.
All right. Well, again, same idea. Is there anything that's going to change that would then suggest a change in the spread? That's what we're trying to figure out.
The amount of information these corporations have, there's more and more information on consumers that's being generated every day. So when they make decisions, it might be more informed by data versus in the past where it's kind of been a guess and test type strategy.
Yeah, actually, if you read about that, McDonald's invested in technology for their drive-through, where what is suggested on that drive-through menu is now like a TV type of a thing, and it's very much targeted towards time of day, people, what people are buying, and increasingly they're going to try and get one-to-one targeting so that they'll know what you want. You'll get your own custom menus. So that is definitely something they're investing in to move faster down the horizon. Here's another interesting one. This is why real world matters. Today, just through serendipity, here's the article on CNBC from a couple hours ago. McDonald's is testing a loyalty program, basically frequent diner points. So I'm not saying this is not replicable, but a loyalty program for them is probably something that's going to tie people even more to McDonald's if you have McBucks or whatever they're going to call it that goes to the future. So again, these are things that we're starting to look at, but I want you to get data. So here's the final piece as you're doing your assignments. Need to get data from the real world. So we just riffed on this for illustrative purposes. I would expect a little bit more diligence on these answers than what we've done. So where do you get diligence on the data? 4 data sources. Source number 1, BICO. BICO stands for Bloomberg Intelligence on a Company. Not every company has it, but big publicly traded ones do. What Bloomberg does is they've hired ex-Wall Street analysts to basically come work for Bloomberg, and they curate the equity research and basically create these Cliff Note primers that are basically a summary of what's going on with the company. So this is a very useful piece because the analysts are trying to do the same thing we are, and it kind of tells you at a summary level what's going on with the company. So that's first place, BICO. Second is BI in general, and these are the industry dashboards. In fact, here's a quick link to it over here. So BI stands for Bloomberg Intelligence. Now, when you get to the industry dashboard, you can search for a specific industry, but this will give you directly to the one for restaurants. So this is the Bloomberg Industry Dashboard. Again, for all the companies, aggregating information. Over here on the left, here is the industry themes. So again, the analysts have curated all the major events that are going on in the industry all in one place. What's going on with the equity research for the major companies, any major litigation issues impacting the industry. Then you can look at data, market share data, macroeconomic data. So we're doing the E part of our analysis. This is the E stuff that matters more to the industry. Industry data, which will include information, for example, on same-store sales, open table reservations. There's a Big Mac, believe it or not, scorecard, etc. Company data, financials, Again, going through the 10K, giving information a little bit more granular that might affect the company. An analyzer, so you can quickly compare those key indicators across companies in the industry. Evaluation library, these are the multiples across the companies. They have a credit score, all the things that drive credit ratings, so you can track that. There's a cost analysis where you have the drivers of cost. So in this case, food, labor, rent, margins, etc., by the industry level. Social media. What kind of social media impacts might these companies be having? Are people talking about them? Is it more positive or negative based on the sentiment that Bloomberg is tracking, etc.? Location data is an example. Private companies in the industry, so like a Chick-fil-A, data on them. So a lot of information at the industry level dashboard. These are a number of actual stores. So first BICO, second BI, then find the industry. Third source of information to help you do this, BRC, which stands for Bloomberg Research. These are the analyst reports in the research portal. So these are the sell side analyst reports, JP Morgan, Barclays, Deutsche Bank, etc. Now, we don't have access to all of them. You have to pay for that. But in our basic license, we have some access to free ones. And again, some of the major banks are on here. So reading through these analyst reports, because they're trying to do the same thing we are. You know, here's a 14-page analyst report that came out today from Barclays talking about what's going on with McDonald's fourth quarter. So they probably just reported their earnings, summary associated with that. So again, a lot of the things that we're talking about, impact of COVID, et cetera, long-term outlook, these analysts are doing the same thing. Final source is here in Elms, outside of Bloomberg. If you go to VBIC, open a new tab. Under the industry data sources that we have, there's a data source called IBIS World. What IBIS does is 1 to 2 times a year, basically they write industry research reports. So buried in these industry reports is a 5 forces analysis. So when you get to IBIS World, you just type a company, in this case, McDonald's, tell you what they're in, and then you can go to the report. This one's from November 2020. And so again, here's information about their supply chain. Here's information about the industry outlook for the next 5 years of what they think is going to happen with the industry. So as you go through this, any one of those 4 sources at a minimum will help you understand and answer EIC. So again, since you're doing real world companies in this class, I want to be really clear. It's perfectly acceptable to use this data with the caveat that you're in an academic environment. Therefore, if I copy and paste this, quote footnote, okay? Don't plagiarize. But if you copy and paste, quote something, it's okay as long as you footnote it. Or put a bibliography in what you turn in. Very important as you're doing your assignments. But again, I expect you to use real world data. And so just source your data as opposed to plagiarize your data. That's very bad if you plagiarize in the academic sense. But very otherwise fair game to use. Okay. And you'll probably need to, because some of the companies we're going to work on this semester, you probably don't know who they are or what they do. And so it's okay to kind of leverage what is out there. Questions about any of that? All right, your next assignment is to do an EIC Monday, 10 a.m. all sections, called homework 2. It's on United Airlines, UAL, US Equity. First thing about the assignment, 500 word minimum paper. If I give a word count minimum, first thing the TAs are going to do is they're going to open up your submission and they're going to check the word count. If they don't see 500 words, they're going to give you a 0. 498 words does not equal partial credit. 498 words is a 0. So word counts are taken seriously. By the way, you can write 800 words and get a 0 because you forgot to use numbers in your paper. So not only must you hit the word count, but you got to use numbers. So you can't just say United is an industry with a negative spread. That's useless information. You have to say what the ROIC is. You have to say what the WACC is. You have to define the spread. Next, when I do your analysis for the industry, we're all going to do the same comp source. So I'm telling you to use analyst curated BINA airlines valuation. So if you go to UAL, and you go to RV, you want to use analyst curated BI and then BINA North American Airlines Valuation Group. There should be 14 airlines on that list. Okay, this is the industry I want you to use for your screenshots for beta and RV custom spread. Right, and make sure you're doing market cap weighted average. And then finally, you're going to basically do an E, an I, and a C. Those were the Bloomberg screens to get the industry data, and IBIS World to help you. And you can see the rubric down here. But basically, you have to do both the current and future 5 years, current and future competitive advantage, and basically give a point of view on how you think it's going to change. So that's the assignment. Individual, due Monday. Questions about any of that? Hopefully pretty straightforward. Remember, TAs have office hours the next 2 days. Please take advantage of that if you need any assistance while you're doing this. And finally, before we wrap up, I want to mention, if I go back to idea or team message, see how we're doing on our trading challenge. This is section 401. So basically, we can see that most of you, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of the 6 teams have started. So team 6, whoever you are, don't forget, by Friday and today, you got to be less than $200,000 worth of cash. And you need to have 10 longs over the course of the semester. So these 4 teams have already met the 10 long requirement, right? But in terms of available cash, these 3 teams have met the cash threshold. This team needs to buy some more stuff. This team definitely needs to buy more stuff. But again, and one team hasn't bought anything. But as I said, we'll check this on Monday. But just a sense of scoring, you know, as we start the competition, this is the column portfolio value that's eventually going to be scored, right? So I'm going to be disqualified. So don't worry about me, because I'm only going to have 1 trade and I'm not going to have the 300,000 threshold. I'm going to have too much cash lying around. But my 1 trade right now would put us in first place because I've actually made the best return so far in the portfolio. Who did I buy? I bought Exxon, and Exxon's way up. So again, but here's the point. Get a sense of how you're doing compared to peers. We'll check it from time to time, and we'll check it on Monday. Remember, by Friday, less than 300,000 in cash, and need to make sure you start trading. Questions about the trading competition?
Yeah, Professor, I remember you saying how under like the networks tab, there was the port or like launch port, and how we could technically share our portfolio with our team members, but they were not able to actually access any of the trades just so they can monitor it.
Yeah.
Could you mind actually showing us how to do that?
Sure. Well, you go to port, and from here, you can basically either manually create it or import your portfolio. So it's going to take a second to load in this test portfolio. But basically, once you get your portfolio in here of companies, then what you can do is, I believe it's here under settings, no, simulation. There's a way to share shared views. You can create a shared view by checking on it and then basically sending that view to whoever. Now, port, and again, you can learn more about port in the certification, is complicated. So, because again, it literally is set up for people to do like reallocate their portfolio mathematically given data in the marketplace. That's what's actually set up to do. The other way, and that's where scenarios, for example, come in. But the other way to look at this is something that the more simpler version is called W. W is worksheets. And what I would recommend is use worksheets, not portfolio, for your purposes. And so the simple idea is you create a new worksheet, create a template, either the equity buy side, equity sell side, performance heat map, like one of those 3 templates, create it. And then what you do when you create it is you just start typing in your tickers. So whoever bought whatever in your portfolio, just put them in. And then what you can do is you can save this and then you can send this to the Bloomberg logins of your teammates. And so then when they go to W, they can get a read-only view of what's actually happening to the portfolio. But the point is, if you use either one, it's read-only. Like the only person that can actually access the trading area is the person that was signed up on the last class. Everybody else would have to kind of look at it in a different way or look at it through your account. So in this case, you can kind of mimic the portfolio really quickly and then just share the portfolio or the W, the worksheet. I think it's easier to share the worksheet than the portfolio. Just a similar functionality. Other questions? Both of these are basically also explained in BMC.
Yeah, Professor, for the stock challenge,
yep,
are you the only ones that is able to see like the group names? Because when I look at it, it's just like pound signs.
Yeah, when you actually see, if I go back to the trading challenge, because I'm an admin, I can see everything. If you're going to this screen, when you click on the drop down and you go to your section, these names will be like asterisked out or X'd out. So you won't know who they are, but what you would know is still relative performance, you versus them. And that's really all that matters. Because I don't think it matters that, you know, is it this team or that team? I just want to know which teams are ahead of me. So if I look at portfolio value, you know, I don't count on the first team, but basically this team is in first place. So I care more about the other teams behind me than I don't count. So, but all of these would be grayed out. You'll know yourself, but you won't know who everybody else is. But as I said, from time to time, including next Monday, I'll pull up the screen. You'll get a little bit more visibility. You'll see this. But I won't go one level down, so I still won't, you won't see who your peers have bought. That you will never see.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. All right, well, I am going to give you the balance of time in class today to start working on the United individual assignment. Remember, it's due for all sections Monday, 10 a.m. TAs again have office hours tomorrow, so please take advantage of that. And otherwise, stay safe. I'll post a video of this up in just a few minutes and see everybody on Monday. Have a great day.
Thank you, Professor.
Right,
Thank
bye-bye.
you.